Ever since they started to become dominant, the Conservative government has been failing. It does come across as a government that has largely run out of ideas. Is there still a problem about the Conservative Party being infected by right-wingers with views which, in my view, are electorally unacceptable and also damaging to our country? I'm afraid the answer to that has to be yes.
So I just want to start by asking what your initial thoughts are on Cameron returning and on the reshuffle.
I'm pleased about the reshuffle. I'm pleased, first of all, that Suella Braverman is gone, because she was clearly completely unsuitable to hold any office in government whatsoever. Is there still a problem about the Conservative Party being infected by right-wingers with views which, in my view, are electorally unacceptable and also damaging to our country? I'm afraid the answer to that has to be yes. All political parties in our system of first past the post are broad churches. It applies to Labour, it applies to the Conservative Party as well. And on the whole, those extremes have tended to be accommodated within the mainstream political party. But what we've seen with the Conservatives since Johnson really came to power in 2018, and indeed in the last year of Theresa May, was the party being hijacked by a group of people who may have support within the Conservative Party membership, but there's no evidence really that they enjoy support even amongst Conservative voters in a majority sense, and yet they are convinced of their own righteousness. And they have been enormously destructive. Now, whether what's happened yesterday is going to be sufficient to restore the Conservative Party's fortunes for the next general election, I think is very questionable. My feeling is that for many members of the electorate, they've made up their mind about this government, and it will be hard to restore that trust and to restore a sense of people feeling connection to the Conservative Party outside of what I call those who are completely dedicated to it. And that's why the party is doing so badly in the opinion polls. So whether this makes an outcome to the next general election, I don't know. But I suppose from my point of view as a former member of the party, and still Conservative with a small c, it's nice to see, pleasant to see, that at long last there seems to be some reality creeping in to the party's approach to politics, whereas previously, although I had some faith that Rishi Sunak saw these issues, and one or two other members of the government, when you looked at it overall, you still had the feeling of this constant drift to the right.
There are a huge number of people calling for a general election at the moment. Do you think there should be one?
Well, there's a perfectly viable argument, because you could say that the ability of this government to deliver good governance in the next 12 months, apart from just keeping the ship afloat, is quite limited. It does come across as a government that has largely run out of ideas and run out of leadership potential in its widest sense. But it's got to be realistic about politics. That's not going to happen. Rishi Sunak will, as all politicians, it will be the same with Labour in the same position, want to hold on to see whether in the next 6 to 9 to 12 months he can make a significant difference and thereby persuade the electorate that more people should vote Conservative. So we're not going to have an early election.
Is there anything that would make you want to become a Conservative MP again?
I think nobody's going to ask me to become a Conservative MP again, so I think it's rather improbable. I remain philosophically a Conservative, but I remain a Conservative of the Liberal centre-right, which is where a large number of my colleagues still belong, even those who are in Parliament. There are still people around there, and there are quite a lot of people who were expelled from the party who similarly belong to that group, and some of them have rejoined and some of them haven't. I haven't gone back and taken membership because I've thought, well, frankly, if people would like me back, I'd like to be satisfied that I'm going to be comfortable in this party, and I don't see any need to give up my independence in order to do it. But I haven't joined any other political party, and I don't think it's very likely that I'm going to do so. I want to see the Conservative Party go back to the moderate Liberal centre-right, which is where, in fact, it has made all the great benefits for our country over the decades and in its history, not where it was heading under Johnson and Truss, and certainly not where Suella Braverman seems to think it ought to go.
Based on what you've seen with this reshuffle and based on what you've seen in the last few years, how do you think the Tories are going to do in the next election?
On the basis of the opinion polling and my instinct, I think they're going to do very badly. I think that the outcome could well be, or was, certainly before this reshuffle, destined to be worse than in 1997. Indeed, I'm on record as saying that if the Liberal Democrats were more competent at putting across a national policy platform, the Conservative Party's position might be even worse. But actually, at the moment, they're not very good at doing that. They can win by-elections, but they have very little traction at a national level. That's an opportunity for the Conservatives if they can go back to the centre ground of politics. But it's very late in the day, and let's face it, Keir Starmer has been very good at occupying that void and giving the impression that he would deliver non-ideological governments. He's had to work quite hard to do that because there are extraordinary elements in the Labour Party that still believe in socialist ideology, which I think is largely rejected by the electorate. But he's been good at doing that. So my take on this is that the Conservatives have still got a mountain to climb, and I would be very surprised if they were to do not just stay in government after the next election, but I'd be very surprised if they were to do even reasonably well so that they can get themselves into respectable opposition. But clearly Sunak ought to be thinking of that because it's really important in a democracy. Unless we move to proportional representation, and I don't see any sign of that happening in the near future, you have got to have an opposition which can be an alternative to the government. And one of the really worrying aspects of the last 10 years is we've had a period when Labour were unfit as an opposition to form government, and we have now had a period when the Conservatives have been frankly unfit to be in government. And if they were to go into opposition and lurch further down Suella Braverman's path, they will be completely unfit as an opposition as well.
So we've seen institutions like our police politicised, weaponised, even the idea of Remembrance Day, so many are institutions by the government. What do you feel about that?
It makes me very uncomfortable. And I was very uncomfortable about the way in which the Home Secretary undermined the independence of the police. We don't live in a state where the Home Secretary dictates whether public demonstrations can take place. It's for the Chief Commissioner to make the decisions as to how they should be managed, and if necessary to make an application for one to be banned, which is a very draconian thing to do. She usurped that role. She put him under pressure. She undermined his independence, entirely contrary to what she should have been doing. And she wrote an article in the Times essentially trying to bully him.
But she's not the only person in government doing this. Again, she was appointed by the government and tolerated for a very, very long time. Do you think that her absence means that this is going to go away and that they're going to stop attacking the police?
It's difficult to know, but there's no doubt that the right of the party, which has been so dominant and strident, and with key members in the cabinet, seems to me increasingly to be marginalised. Indeed, so marginalised that some of them are threatening to try and get rid of the Prime Minister. I think that's a complete fantasy myself. But their marginalisation is a very good thing because they have been immensely destructive. And when you look back on the record of Conservatives' government since 2010, ever since they started to become dominant, the Conservative government has been failing.
Do you think the party will split into two at some point in the future? We've heard lots of people speculating that
it's possible. But it all depends if the party can move back towards the centre. If it can move back towards the centre, which it's showing some signs of doing, then I don't think it'll split. It's possible, I suppose, that some of the rump element on the right may go off and join Reform. But I personally think it's more likely than not to hold together. But that's dependent on good leadership.
Thank you so much for watching this interview with the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. Look, Byline TV, it's a totally independent media channel. There's no billionaires, there's no dodgy funding, and we've made hundreds of video reports and videos for the last 2 years exposing government scandals, things like the impact of Brexit on our society, and it's really expensive making this kind of content, shooting, editing, reports, so we rely totally just on you. So if you could sign up at byline.tv, get access to our feature-length films, our investigations, and you can chat to us and suggest future content you'd like us to make. Thanks again.